The number of people out of work in Spain hits a record high as Europe struggles to contain its debt crisis. But with the rates of depression and suicide also on the rise, what's the social impact and the human cost of austerity? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sami Zaidan. Well, new figures show 1 in 4 Spanish workers is now without a job. Only Greece has a higher unemployment rate in the European Union. But as austerity measures bite, there's growing concern the cuts are taking a more worrying toll. Health groups say there's been a sharp rise in mental health problems at the same time as welfare services are being cut back. And the Red Cross says a growing number of Europeans are now relying on food aid. From Madrid, Al Jazeera's Jonah Hull reports.
It's lunchtime at a charity-run soup kitchen in Madrid. In this hard-hit suburb, hunger is a very real symptom of Spain's economic crisis. For many here, it is the only meal of the day.
I need to come here because I can't make ends meet until the end of the month, so I come here every day.
4 years ago, when all this started, I was in a fairly good situation, but suddenly things got much worse for me. Now this place is helping me to get by.
Since the crisis began in 2008, unemployment has spiralled, with 1 in 4 adults now out of work. Not long ago, mainly poor immigrants sat down to lunch at these tables. Now, an equal number of Spaniards does as well.
What you see here are people receiving a daily meal because they can't afford to feed themselves. What you don't see is that perhaps half of these people had jobs and could afford to put food on the table just 4 years ago.
Spain's new poor have grown so much and so rapidly that the Red Cross now estimates that 2.3 million people are extremely vulnerable. An annual appeal by the Spanish Red Cross, normally devoted to disaster victims far away, is for the first time focused on Spain itself.
What Spain is living through now, of course, can't be compared to the aftermath of an earthquake or a flood. But exceptionally, it's also true that the Spanish Red Cross has never had to help so many people with such basic needs and over such a long period. This has forced us to make an appeal to the Spanish citizens for support so that we can meet those needs.
This time, the disaster is happening at home. The vulnerable, the homeless and the hungry are neighbours and countrymen. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Madrid.
So, what is the human cost of austerity? For more on this, I'm joined by our 3 guests from Hong Kong. Diego Lopez, Manager of Corporate Finance for KPMG. That's a multinational consulting firm. Diego also blogs about the economy, and it's called The Global Islander. From London, we have Madhur, global economist at HSBC Bank. Madhur specialises on Spain's economy and the labour market. And from Brussels, Nyman, Director of Mental Health Europe. Maria specialises in EU law and human rights. If I could start with Madhur. You know, austerity, as I'm sure you're seeing these days when you read the papers, is getting a lot of bad press when it comes to social problems, isn't it? Does it deserve it, or are the social problems really exaggerated?
Thank you for having me on your show. I think that obviously austerity is something that is not considered to be the best option because it does come with social problems and there is no way of getting out of it. But the reality is that the debt situation, not just Spain, but a lot of Southern Europe and a lot of the Western world in general, is unsustainable, and that has to be cut back. So you have to have austerity. It's about the way in which you deliver it, over the time over which you deliver it, that is really of relevance.
All right, let's go over to Maria. As you've heard there, the comment from our guest that austerity is necessary. Tell us about some of the evidence that you have that links austerity directly to some of the social problems like mental health issues?
Yes, we have seen that the impact on the mental health of the population because of the financial crisis is really huge. Because of the increase in unemployment, we see increases in suicide, which is really the most worrying, I would say, the most worrying consequence of the crisis. We see that for 1% unemployment, increased unemployment, the increase in suicides are almost as high. So we have statistics showing 0.8% increase in suicide for every % increase in unemployment. So and also the fear of losing your job is so big now in many countries. So the mental health difficulties, the support needs, they really increase. But the response of very many governments right now is to cut in services, to cut to support to NGOs, which is really not the right and not the wise decision to take in times of crisis.
So
you need to
imagine
cut,
the more
of
that
course,
these services are cut, the greater the problems, social problems become then.
Yes, exactly, because you need also to invest in certain areas, and I would say that you would need to invest in support services to people with mental health problems, also to prevent difficulties, because you also see a vicious circle. The more persons that face mental health issues and unemployment, because mental health issues are a consequence of unemployment, and the other way around. You may lose your job because of mental health issues, because of fear of the future. And if you want to break that vicious circle, you really need also to work on promotion and prevention, so that these people can continue to contribute to society also, and to support and help a way out of the crisis.
All right, and you mentioned their suicide rates. Let's look at some of the numbers and the stats that we got here about specific cases. Let's say in Greece, well, before the financial crisis began, Greece had actually the lowest suicide rates in Europe. But the Greek Health Ministry says the number of people taking their own lives has soared up by 40% in the first half of 2011. Well, it pointed to a study which demonstrated that when the unemployment rate rises by more than 3%, the suicide rate goes up by almost 4.5%. The ministry also notes that the National Depression and Suicide Hotline registered a 40% increase between 2010 and 2011, with many calls related to job losses and living costs. And in Spain, of course, we've had some sad incidents too. A 53-year-old man hanged himself on Thursday. That's shortly before bailiffs came to evict him. Well, he was found dead at his home in the southern city of Granada. Police confirmed a foreclosure order for his home was due to be served. The PAH, that's a group which represents mortgage holders in Spain, says hundreds of evictions are being carried out like this every day. Let's take the discussion to Diego. And talking of that vicious circle, is it also a vicious circle in the sense that the more unhealthy and unhappy society and also the workforce becomes, the less productive they become?
Yeah, I think the economic data is terrible, and you know, 25% unemployment means 5.8 million people right now unemployed. And we're talking about the 5th largest economy in Europe. So you know, the level can be similar to in Greece, but we're talking about a much larger economy, which in the total of unemployed people in Europe, which is 25 million, makes a lot of difference. So these social repercussions are not surprising when we're talking about this amount of people, you know, entire families without any paycheck. What is worse, that they have run out of unemployment subsidy. The government is not, you know, the government subsidies are totally stopped for small and medium enterprises, and there are no incentives for entrepreneurs. So I think at that respect, austerity measures are not really working. And I think during these 4 years,
so would you disagree with what Madhur said, that, you know, it may not be a perfect way, but some level of austerity measures really are necessary?
Well, I think, you know, during these 4 years, the US and the European Union have taken different ways to deal with the crisis. And I think even in the US,
neither of them seem to have really cracked it, though, have they?
Well, it's true, but actually the unemployment rates are decreasing right now in other economies like the US and Japan right now, whereas in the European Union it's still increasing. And we are, for instance, in Spain, we are seeing a 1.3% decrease in the GDP in the last quarter, which means another recession during this 4 years period. So I think it's pretty clear that the austerity measures are not working.
All right, let's go back to Madhur. You started by saying that, austerity is necessary. Listening to what our other guests are saying, it sounds almost like not only is it not necessary, it may even be counterproductive and undermine a society's ability to get out of the mess and be more productive.
I think I'd like to make a couple of points on that. First of all, you have to remember that Spain so far has only done limited austerity. If you compare it to a country like Ireland, that's been doing austerity since 2008, that's 5 years of austerity. If you remember last year, in the first half of last year, Spain was actually stimulating its economy before the elections. So to say that the rise in the unemployment rate has been down to austerity, I think is a little excessive. Of course, austerity will lead to higher unemployment, but the unemployment rate has been rising because there was a real estate sector bubble which burst, there was a banking sector bubble which burst, and that has had an impact on the private sector. That's one point that I would like to make clear. So the rise in unemployment in Spain is not really down to austerity so far. We do expect that to have an impact. It's not that important a reason so far. And the second thing that I do want to talk about is that when you say that the unemployment situation in the US or in other countries is improving, it's very important to keep in mind that why is the unemployment rate improving? And even in these countries, you have to remember there is no austerity, of course, but that only means a bigger debt problem later down the road. But the unemployment situation is improving
Madhur, you made some good
people
points
are
here.
leaving
Allow
the
me to
labor
jump
force.
in here and take them back to Diego. She made two very good points there, that you're giving an example of maybe a situation slightly better in the US, but really you're kicking the can down the road, and you're citing unemployment figures in Spain which are created not by austerity but by other issues. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, besides the pure economic indicators, I think in Spain the real problems right now are of social nature. The people, there is a general discontent and general loss of confidence in the Spanish economy, not only by international views, but in the Spanish people that feel that they don't have a future right now in the country. So there is a huge.
So you're saying that whatever's
people.
created this initial unemployment, austerity is exaggerating it. In other words, if I'm understanding you right.
No, I mean, well, it's not exaggerating. Actually, it's the other way around. People, international press doesn't fully gather the sentiment in Spain. I think there are demonstrations every week. The people are very, very discontent. There is a huge outflow of people emigrating to other countries. There is a brain drain. And even the immigrants that used to comprise of the workforce in Spain, they are returning to their home countries because there is no opportunities for them in the country.
All right, if we could take it back to Maria and let's talk a little bit about social and mental health issues. When we talk about mental health issues, you think of a very small segment of society or a workforce that simply goes insane and people killing themselves is a very small percentage of society. Is perhaps mental health issues, are they perhaps more pervasive than that and much more subtle than just insanity and killing yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, mental health issues will affect approximately 1 out of 4 persons at least one given point in their lifetime. So it's a huge issue, and I also think it's important to remember that unemployment is not the only problem with the austerity, with the financial crisis, with the austerity measures. I mean, right now what we see also in terms of mental health, I mean, there is an increase, of course, because of unemployment, where there is a clear link to mental health issues, but we also see cuts in benefits. So persons who did already not have an employment, they have their benefit cuts. We see support services being decreased. We see cuts in funding to NGOs. We see an increase in hate crimes towards persons with mental health problems and other persons with disabilities, because they are seen as benefit scroungers. Now that we need to cut in spending, they are the first victims, because you can really see that there is an increase in hate
Maria,
crimes,
tell me a little more of the
violence,
broader range of mental
health
problems then that afflicts society. What are we talking about?
Yes.
Tension? What are we talking about?
Yes. We can talk, I mean, depression, for example, is a huge group. Anxiety, social phobia. There's a range of mental health issues, and very often they are invisible, which further makes sometimes the situation complicated, because, I mean, now, as I was mentioning, that there's a cuts in benefits and cuts in services, because very many of these people that were receiving some support, they are now being re-evaluated, and there are doubts about their actual needs. So, which is another, which actually makes it people who already have some difficulties have their situation even worsened. It's a range. I mean, it's anything from milder mental health issues, depression for a short time, anxiety. I mean, issues that very many people, very many of us will face at least one point in our lifetime, to chronic
That's really worrying. That's a really worrying thought there. Let me jump in and take it to Madhur again, if I could. We'll come back to you in a moment, Maria. But what do you make of claims like this, Madhur, that there are economists, and I'm sure you've heard of them, who say that if you take everything from the 1982 developing world debt crisis, the 1994 Mexican crisis, the 1997 Asian crisis, you'll find that those countries that followed the austerity measure program, the IMF program, only saw their economies sink deeper into recession, and countries like Malaysia and Argentina that didn't manage to recover quicker and easier.
Well, I think I'd again like to stress what I said right at the beginning. I'm not saying we have to do austerity and to do it right now. I think it's important to be aware of the fact that you have to cut back debt. The way in which it is done and the time period over which it is done is very important. So front-loading austerity, trying to do too much in too short a period of time.
When we look at Europe,
I think
is austerity right for Greece, for Spain? Because that's what is being done right now, isn't it?
I think you have to address the fact that they have been living beyond their means, in the sense of there's too much debt, both at the private level and at the government level, has to be addressed. The way in which this is addressed is the key. It's not about doing austerity or not doing austerity. It's about how do you do it, and that I think is important. And that's why you have seen a relaxation of the kind of terms. So 2013 was when Greece was supposed to be back in budget balance. Now that has been relaxed. Even Spain has seen its fiscal targets being revised up. They are getting more time to deliver the austerity, and I think that is key, and that is very, very essential.
All right, Diego, do you agree with that? That austerity measures are being tweaked to fit the situation, and there is no alternative but to tweak it and work on it and continue to go with it?
Well, actually, I tend to disagree with that. And actually, it would be a mistake, I think, to compare Spain with Greece, because every country within the European Union is different. It's true that in Greece we are seeing 120% of debt over GDP. But in Spain, the structural problems are very different. We only have 70% of debt over GDP, which is much lower than in France, Germany, and the other leading countries in Europe. So, every country has different structural problems. I think the underlying issue here is that austerity is not working for neither of them.
Well, what's the alternative then, Diego? I mean, it sounds a logical argument, doesn't it? If you've spent too much, you've got to cut your spending, save with the exception perhaps of the rich, who are allegedly the ones who create jobs and growth, and you've got to relax taxes for them, or so goes the argument. What's wrong with that argument?
Yeah, I think the balance between government income and spending is always a tough one to decide. But the problem in Spain right now is that there are neither incentives nor subsidies for entrepreneurs, for young people to stay in the country, to create employment and to grow economy. So I think the social roots of this crisis are the most important ones.
All right, Madhur, I want to read this quote to you. It's from Ha-Jun Chang, who teaches at the University of Cambridge, teaches economics actually, and he says, if the whole history of capitalism, and not just the experiences of the last few years, shows that the supposed remedies for today's economic crisis are not going to work, and clearly he doesn't believe they are, what are our political and economic leaders doing? Perhaps they are insane, if we follow Albert Einstein's definition of insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, he goes on, aside of the comical allusion to insanity, to say that perhaps what is really at stake for political and economic leaders is not just fixing the economy, but also keeping the system intact.
Well, let me put it to you like this. If no austerity was the answer, then Japan should have been growing at a very, very fast pace at this point of time, right? You haven't really seen too much austerity from them. You've got the debt to GDP ratio of over 200%. But Japan is stuck in a low growth phase. So clearly addressing your debt issue is important. And once again, I need to stress here how austerity is done is important. If you're going to cut capital
let me put the question this way,
if you're going to get spending on education,
are there any examples where austerity has been done in the right way, in the right timing, and it's actually worked?
I think that you have seen several examples of when austerity has been done, even in the UK in the 70s when austerity was done, and that did help the economy. There are several examples if you look at countries even in Asia. Of course, they went through a very, very tough and very, very painful period, but they came out stronger from that. So again, I have to stress, if you're cutting capital spending, if you're cutting spending on education, you're lowering the potential growth rate of the economy, and that's incorrect. What you need to cut is current spending on wages and salaries. That needs to be cut, because what you don't want to see, and what's happening right now, is that you're cutting everything that helps boost potential growth and the ability to employ more people, and that's what needs to change.
Well, there are those, of course, Madhur, who argue that cutting wages and salaries hurts the lower income groups and thereby also cuts the consumer ability.
You have to become more competitive. Unfortunately, everybody's trying to do the same thing at the same time. So I'm not talking about cutting wages and salaries for the low-income people. What I'm trying to say is that there are lots of countries where you have a very expanded public sector. You need to streamline the public sector, and that will allow the private sector to come up a little bit more, and maybe the hiring to start over there.
Right.
But to say that, I'm going to cut I'm going to cut capital spending, I'm not going to invest in infrastructure, in education, in health by 50%. But I'll pay you an extra Christmas bonus.
That's too drastic.
Well,
all right.
That's a difficult argument.
Let's bring in Maria as we focus here on the link between austerity measures and social problems and mental health problems. Do we know that the opposite is true? That the absence of austerity measures, or the alternative, whatever it is to austerity measures, wouldn't be associated with a whole new set of social and mental health issues?
Yes, I mean, in the sense that the financial crisis and austerity measures, it really brings in also, well, first of all, it brings in a lot of a big part of the population right now experience fear, and fear has a has a link to mental health issues. But also, if you don't give a person the right support services from the beginning, so if you don't also invest in prevention, in promotion, in early interventions, then you will really have an increased number of persons who face more serious difficulties. And of course, for the persons who have their support cut, their funding cut, there definitely there is an issue with mental health. And we also see actually now that in some countries where there was where actually human rights had come quite far. To give an example, I mean, as the UK, where persons with mental health problems and other persons with disabilities, they now live included in society. They have moved out from these big psychiatric institutions where they do not have the possibilities to take decisions on their own lives, for example. Well, now, because of the services in society are being cut, a lot of these persons have to move back to this kind of places. So we even see a big step back in terms of human rights, which is for me, one of the most worrying effects of this crisis. So and that in its turn has definitely also an impact on mental health. So I mean, of course, cuts and austerity, it has a disastrous impact on mental health, but you will always have mental health issues in society, whether you have a crisis or not, but you can definitely limit the impact of it.
Well, we'll have to leave the discussion there. Let's thank our guests from Hong Kong, Diego Lopez, Madhur in London, and from Brussels, Maria Nyman. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us your feedback, we welcome it. Just email us your thoughts at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye and thanks for watching.